Our guest today is Mr. John Ross, the Senior Fellow of the College, who's been a Fellow since 1962. We welcome him most sincerely and hope it will not be a too painful experience for him. In his lifetime, he has been a historian, soldier, lawyer, businessman, art collector, gardener, it's fair to say, and a very active senior fellow who has done an enormous amount of good for the college behind the scenes. John Ross, you are extremely welcome with us.
Thank you very much.
Now, I have various areas of question to ask you. I know you were born in Cork in 1919, a momentous year in Irish history. You moved to England in 1926 after the all too early death of your father. But I do know you have various memories of childhood days in Cork, which must be very interesting, coming of a unionist family like yourself. Could you tell us a bit about some of those memories?
It's very hard to know how far one's memories are one's memories and how far one's memories are the stories that one's heard in one's childhood and that I've heard from my mother after my father's death and after the events that happened. But two or three things of the troubled times do stick very strongly in my memory. You're quite right to say that I came from a unionist family. My father was very strongly unionist, and so was my mother. My father used to put up a Union Jack from a flagpole in front of our house every morning, and during the time of the War of Independence, that the Union Jack used to be riddled with bullet holes from time to time. And when it was pulled down in the evening, my mother used to sew it up so that it could go up again in the morning. And I always remember hearing about that. I don't think I could possibly have actually seen it, but I remember the flagpole and flags, but I don't really remember that particular incident. But it was so much ingrained as part of my youth as a story from my mother. The other thing that I remember, I remember during the Civil War, as a Free State soldier being shot in our garden, and I can also remember occasions when the country was very much in a state of unrest and being stopped when I was driving with my father, who was one of the early owners of a large motor car in Ireland, in the south of Ireland, being stopped by the new civil guards at Garda Síochána, and when there was guerrilla activity going on in the area of places like Mallow and those sort of places in Cork. So I do have memories, some of which are memories, perhaps other people's memories, but some of which are quite definitely my own of that particular time.
Well, now, moving from Cork in post-revolutionary Ireland to the England of the 1920s and 30s, you went to prep school in England, to public school, Eastbourne College, and then for a year to Cambridge before returning to Ireland to study at Trinity. You were there at the time of, I suppose, Otway Riven and other famous Trinity historians. Constantia Maxwell, perhaps?
Yes, both of those I remember well, and also, of course, I remember Curtis, who was a great historian, and perhaps even more important than any of those was Theo Moody, who came to Trinity to teach and lecture at the same time as I first went there. And the great thing with him was that he was learning the particular special area of history that we were supposed to be doing for Maud. And we used to try and get ahead of him all the time so as to ask awkward questions. But he was a great influence both on the history school and on Trinity and on me at that particular time, because he came from that magnificent North of Ireland Presbyterian nationalist stock, but reasonable and tolerant and liberal, and he was a very great influence, I think, at that time in Trinity.
I have very happy memories of him myself. He was a lovely man, as
He was a
they
wonderful
say
man,
down
yes.
here. He really was. And R.B. McDowell, I suppose, though maybe
R.B.
he was a bit
yes.
young in those days.
R.B. was even in those days a great character. I mean, he was a postgraduate who moved around with scarves and overcoats, and probably 2 overcoats and a large hat in the height of summer, complaining that he was cold. But he was tremendous character and the greatest fun, and of course a marvellous raconteur.
Story, at least I'd like to ask you, about Columbus in the 1930s. When you went up to Trinity in late 39, was it? There must have been quite a few Columbans, but you, having been educated in England, were probably very little aware of this college in the mountains, which you were later to serve with such fervour. What were your impressions of Columbus in those days?
Well, I didn't, actually before going to Trinity, I didn't have a great rapport or any rapport with Columbus or Columbans. I didn't seem to number many of them amongst my friends. But I did find, when I went to Trinity, that Columbans were, or seemed to be rather different from other people in Trinity, in the sense that they had a sense of Irishness, which was not quite so strong, I felt, as it was in perhaps some other places. But they were a very erudite, quiet, well-behaved lot. They didn't seem to me always to take as much activity, part in activities, as quite a lot of other people. They tended to be rather more laid back, the Columbans of my time in Trinity, and one looked on them as being very nice people. They were all very well behaved. Columbus never seemed to get into trouble in Trinity, so one looked upon them as rather quieter than most of one's contemporaries.
I'm interested you say they had a reputation for being erudite, because this doesn't quite tally with what Fitzroy Pyle told me. He was my tutor many years later. He told me very severely that Columbus was a non-academic school, only interested in sport. And he cited various cases. I suppose T.G. McVie was a very famous all-round sportsman, but he plied his books too, because he became a distinguished solicitor, and others too, of course. But I'm wondering whether the non-sporting reputation was one that, percolated through to the general student body.
I think it did. I think we were conscious of people like T.G. McVie. Again, he was a good deal older than I was, so he'd already left. But there were a number of other people who were quite prominent in cricket particularly. But I think we were conscious of them as being rather hard-working, quiet people who didn't raise the roof or create trouble or get themselves embroiled in political turmoil of one kind or another.
But I'm very glad to hear another view to give a bit of contrast to Fitzroy Pyle, because I felt he was being a bit unfair on some very scholarly people who had served both Trinity and Columbus with great distinction. Many years back, of course, it was known as Gwinnity College because of the Gwynns.
Oh, yes.
And all 8 Gwynn brothers came here. But that is, of course, the 1880s, 1890s. But to refer to something about Trinity, what would you think was the political climate of Trinity? Now, you were there, of course, in the most critical years of the Second World War, 40, 41, 42. I remember a poem written at TCD, a college in Miscellany, a satirical poem depicting Mr. de Valera addressing the Hist. and you were later yourself auditor of the history. Mr. de Valera said, "Oh, you audience of aliens and traitors." Now, was Trinity in those days, in your view, a very unionist, stroke West Britain university? How could you comment on that?
I think it was seen to be more West Brit than it actually was. It was looked on outside as being Protestant and West Brit. Inside, it wasn't quite like that. Some of the staff may have looked at it that way, and indeed some of the students may have looked at it that way. I remember my tutor, who was the great Sir Robert Tate, saying to me one day, "John, my boy, when I go outside this place, I go into a foreign country." That, I think, was typical of his generation, but was not typical at all of mine. There's no doubt that by and large, the students in Trinity were very strongly pro-Allied. A lot of students went from Trinity, sometimes a number of great friends of mine, sometimes during their studies, sometimes after completing their degrees, went off to the British services and served in the British services. Trinity was very strongly pro-Allied, but that didn't mean that there were not some people who were not pro-Allied. It also didn't mean that Trinity was 100% Anglo-Irish West Brit, because it wasn't in those days. And I made a lot of very good friends who remained friends for years afterwards, who were very strong nationalists, and because they were strong nationalists and Republican very often, were not pro-British. They were not pro-German during the war. There were very few pro-Germans. There were a few, but there were not many pro-Germans. But there were a few who were definitely very strongly neutral, and if neutral, they could have been more neutral against the British than for them. But by and large, Trinity was very, very emotionally, strongly allied, always.
You joined the Irish Guards, were commissioned in 1942. Are there any
43.
43.
I joined
yes.
in 42, and I was commissioned 8 months later.
Are there any aspects of your war service you find particularly memorable that you'd like to share with us?
Well, my war service was rather unusual in a way, because after I was commissioned, I was trained in the Irish Guards as a signals officer, because there'd been a lot of signals officer casualties with our 1st Battalion in North Africa. When the 1st Battalion came back after North Africa, came back to Italy, signals officers were put into cotton wool, because they had to be trained. Very good. They had a long period of training, and they put them very much in reserve. So I didn't find myself doing anything terribly exciting for quite a long time, and I was as a signals officer, the most exciting thing I think I did was at home, when at one stage I was sent down to Chequers to do to look at Winston Churchill's signals, which this was about 1943, I think, 1943, or maybe as late as 1944, when I was horrified to find that Chequers was surrounded by anti-aircraft guns. It had a company of the Brigade of Guards as a sort of personal troops around the house, and it had Royal Corps of Signals people, and it had a dugout, which was a command dugout. And I discovered to my absolute horror that there was no line of communication except the telephone when you could get at it, between the anti-aircraft guns, the troops who were on the ground, and the signallers in the house. And I had this rather nice interesting job, which was never fortunately put to the test, of coordinating all those signals. But I'd hate to think of what might have happened if there had been any sort of parachute raid or anything on Chequers at a much earlier period. But that was one of the interesting things I had to do. Later on, much later on, when I was sent to Germany, I got sent to a staff job with 5th Guards Brigade. And I did that when the war was over. That was very interesting because I got sent to Poland when Poland was in civil war, and I had an extremely interesting time in Warsaw, when there was a lot of resistance still going on outside Warsaw and in Poland. There were some British troops which I was sent in with to go to the British embassy in Warsaw, which had been established in a communist country. But the intrigue and the espionage and the counter-espionage and the attempts to embarrass a man called Cavendish Bentinck, who was the British ambassador, were enormous, and it was a very, very exciting time. But my army career was very mixed and rather unusual.
Now, on being demobbed, you shortly afterwards began reading law at Trinity and qualified, I think, in 1947.
Well, I knew no law, so I didn't start till 1947, and before that I had to learn Irish, which, not having been sent to Columba's, which I always remember as a school where the Irish was very good, I used to think. But not having got St. Cloud's, but having gone to an English school, I really knew virtually no Irish at all. So I had to go, first of all, to learn Irish. And I went down to the Blaskets, which in those days were inhabited with about 60 people. And I lived on Blasket, Great Blasket, for about 3 months with the Blasket people and learned some Irish. And after I'd learned the Irish and then passed the exam to be apprentices solicitor, I started reading law, working in the solicitor office, reading law in Trinity. And by that time I was married with, our first child was born on the day that I started my apprenticeship. So I wasn't actually qualified until 1950 or 1951.
So your LLB, of course, that's in effect a Bachelor of Law, I suppose.
That's a postgraduate.
That is your primary degree, was it?
No, the primary degree really would have been the modern history and political science, but the law degree was the LLB, which I thought it was worth taking at the same time as I was doing my solicitor's exams.
Well, since then you've been with Matheson Ormsby and Prentice, a very distinguished Dublin firm of solicitors. You have, I think, largely retired from them.
I've completely retired. I've retired over 5 years.
And you have many business interests now, and you've been on the board of the Adelaide Hospital too, for example, kept your hand in many aspects of Irish life. One remembers you as a senator, and I just wonder, when had you political stirrings? When was the first time that you felt you'd like to be a senator?
Oh, I don't know about being a senator, but I certainly had political stirrings in Trinity. I'd always, during that period when I was in England, at school in England, I always felt my Irish roots very, very strongly pulling me back. And although I only came back for a number of years for holidays, I was kept in touch with Ireland. And when I came to Trinity, this all really suddenly burst out, and I felt what a tragedy it was that the people who I knew in Trinity and the people who were sort of represented by my own background felt that they were excluded from Irish public life. I won't say political life, but Irish public life. I think they withdrew themselves from political life, but they also felt excluded from Irish public life, and they tended to collect in their own social circles and not mix enough with the main people of Ireland. And so I think you have to go back to my time in Trinity when you ask when my sort of political stirrings, that they were all there then. I felt then that at some stage I wanted to take some part in Irish public life. I wasn't thinking of the Senate in those days. I wasn't thinking of anything in particular, but I felt that if you like, the Protestant Anglo-Irish were getting themselves marginalised, were marginalising themselves, in fact, as well as being marginalised. I mean, there was no doubt that they were being marginalised too, but they felt they were being marginalised, and so they took no part. They just kept with the past and would not move with the present or the future. The present was difficult. The future was rather hopeful. So those ideas were there quite early on. But I wasn't able to do anything about it, of course, until much later, because I had to get myself established in my career. And that was very difficult because I had no family background in the law. I had family background in trade, but not in the law. So there was no way that I could get practice with a family firm or anything of that kind. I had to make my own way and get my own clients, which wasn't easy in those days because all my contemporaries, of course, my friends, would have gone to their own solicitors. Well, by the time I came back again and got myself qualified, they'd all got their own solicitors, so I had to look somewhere else.
Now, touching your political experiences, what gives you most satisfaction looking back on your political career? Where do you think you made your maximum contribution?
Very hard to tell, because I think the contribution that I was trying to make, certainly when I was in the Senate, was to show that people of Anglo-Irish stock could take a part, without chips, could take a part in the then modern Ireland, in other words, the Ireland of the 60s, and could say their say without being particularly Protestant, without being particularly grovelling. This was the other problem, I think, that many Protestant people at that particular time felt that they should apologise for their existence. I never felt that I should apologise for my existence. At the same time, I never felt strongly unionist. That was all in the past. It was a new Ireland that interested me, and it was a new Ireland that I felt that we should make a contribution. And that was what I tried to do. And I think in my 4.5 years or whatever it was in the Senate, I think I was making that. It was rather slow. I mean, I wasn't nearly as successful as I would like to have been, but I think it was making its point, and I found that I could talk to my fellow senators and be listened to, and I mean both publicly in the Senate or outside, but I meant talking to them in the bar after a debate or something of that kind on a particular bill, or go and see ministers. But I felt one must do this on one's own right, and not apologetically saying, "No, we're here. Please look at us. We're trying to be nice." I never felt that we should conform.
Well, I remember Owen Sheehy Skeffington saying, if you allow yourself to be used as a doormat, people will walk on you. Now, I remember in 1961, you, in fact, took Skeffington's seat. And I remember also that Skeffington was a man in very poor health. It probably actually saved his life. Staying those 4 years out, he was able to recover and not have to work nearly as hard. But Skeffington used the word, the obscurantist, De Valera, McQuaid age. Were you conscious of, might I call it, sort of clouds of mental darkness in the Ireland of those days, did you feel that there were forces which regarded you as alien in Irish public life? Were you very much an outsider, or were they fairly friendly to you and accept you as a human being who came of a different background but still had his own affection for this country and his own desire to make a contribution towards it?
That's a very interesting question, because I think one definitely was an outsider, and I don't think there's any doubt that people, majority of people, particularly political people that you came across, greeted you with grave suspicion. I mean, you came from the wrong background, and they were still full of the War of Independence thoughts and full of the Civil War amongst themselves, let alone with anybody else. So that yes, one was highly under suspicion, and you were a very. I mean, I felt I was a very strange animal. That I mean, I quite enjoyed being a strange animal, but that didn't it didn't stop me from saying what I wanted to say or doing what I wanted to do. And I found after a time that I could establish rapport with various people. I mean, now George Colley, I had a great friendship with, really, but we were completely different ends of the political spectrum in terms of background. But George would listen to me, and he was actually he was the person who was the beginnings, just the beginnings of New Ireland in the, to my mind, in the Fianna Fáil party. I mean, there were a lot of people in that party who simply wouldn't touch you with a barge pole because they were so suspicious of you. But George was the sort of person that you could talk to. Charlie Haughey was the sort of person you could talk to too, but you talked to on completely different terms. I remember with Charlie Haughey once, he very soon after I was elected to the Senate, it was a time when there were raids across the border to Sean South, and those people were coming up from the south and making raids across the border. And of course, in the Trinity Senate, a lot of the electors at that time, quite a proportion of the electors at that time, came from Northern Ireland, lived in Northern Ireland. And I remember going to Charlie Haughey, who was Minister of Justice at the time, and saying, I have a lot of electors from a lot of constituents from Northern Ireland who are very concerned about what's happening down here, and they are suspicious. And I'm sure that you have no sympathy with this, but they are very suspicious of the Irish government's attitude to people who are making raids across the border on RUC establishments and so on. And they think you're encouraging them. I'd rather like to ask you, would you facilitate me so that I can go up and see some Garda stations and go on some patrols with the Garda and go and see what they're really doing, so that I can assure my northern constituents that they're not being let down at all by the southern government. And he looked at me and he said, "No." He said, "I'm not going to let you do that. Of course you're not going to let. I'm not going to let you do that. You can't possibly do that." So I said, "Well, this is what my constituents would like me to do, and it'd be very reassuring if they did it." And he said, "Well, no, that's the end of it. I don't care a damn about your northern constituents." And I remember saying to him, "Well, if you really care about United Ireland, you should be caring about my northern constituents."
Exactly.
And he said, "Well, that's another matter." that ended our interview, but I didn't go on that particular expedition that I wanted to.
You see, the Trinity electorate really formed a sort of United Ireland.
Oh,
in miniature.
yes.
It was an all-Ireland constituency.
You've now hit on something very interesting, you see, because there were very few institutions which covered all Ireland, and Trinity was one of them. I mean, Trinity was considered to be a Protestant university. It was banned, of course, by the Archbishop of Dublin, McQuaid, John Charles McQuaid. You couldn't go to Trinity unless you had very firm reasons, or you took a very courageous step if you were a Catholic. But there were lots of Roman Catholics in Trinity at the time, and there were lots in those days. There were lots of northern people in Trinity too, and Trinity was a microcosm of the whole of Ireland. And the other thing that I had, of course, which made a lot of influence with me, was the Irish Guards, because they, surprisingly, were another microcosm. I mean, you could have a platoon of troops who would be perhaps a third from the north, a third or more than a third from the south, and a few thrown in from Liverpool or somewhere else, and a few others perhaps who weren't Irish at all. But they were very much an Irish regiment, and I think this applies to nearly all the regiments of the British Army, oddly enough.
So a microcosm of Ireland, of all the social classes and shades of religion as well.
Yes, it covered, of course, it covered both officers and men. I mean, there were complete mixture, and you could one day be soldiering beside a bloody Shinner, and another day you'll be soldiering beside some bloody Northern Unionist. So, and of course, when you're dependent on somebody looking after your life, looking after you if you're doing something or other, or you're looking after him, you don't care very much which side of the border he comes from or what his religion is. He's your friend, and he's your friend for life.
Well, now, moving away from the Senate, it was as a senator that you were approached to join the governing board of this college. Probably Major Owen Guinness was instrumental. I know you were installed a fellow in 1962. I checked in the Columba. And is there anything you would like to comment on about the changes in Columbus over the years? What sort of impression did it make on you in those days? And any particular developments you'd like to refer to in the intervening 34 years?
Yes, it's a long time. Well, of course, it's changed dramatically since the time I joined the board, but I suppose I think of the most dramatic change was being co-educational. That was fascinating because it took the board a long time, and it was not wasn't discussed outside the board at all. It was very secretly approached, I think, really by the board.
Are you at liberty to disclose who really were the moving forces behind Columbus going co-ed?
I don't know that I am at liberty to do that.
Then I shan't press you.
You can't press me on that, really. I can tell you that I was one of them myself. I mean, I was very strongly in favour of going co-ed because I felt it was really, first of all, moving with the times, and it was rather important to do that. I also felt that having been at a boys' boarding school, there were certain, it seemed to me to be very healthy traits in having girls in a school on a co-educational basis. There'd be a much more natural growing up between the sexes, which seemed to me to be a very healthy idea. But I do remember the boys here, before we went to co-ed, always seemed to me to be awfully scruffy, with long hair and not always as clean-shirted as perhaps they might have been, and generally a little bit ragtag and bobtail. And when the girls came in, of course there were only 4 or 5 girls to start with, and they were the senior schools, but when they senior forms, but when they came in any sort of strength, which was only after a few years. The transformation, I thought, was dramatic. I mean, the hair got cut and washed, and ties were at full mast, and shirts were clean, and boys seemed to behave better. They behaved well to the girls, very chivalrously to the girls. The whole place seemed to me to be transformed. I was thrilled with it when it came in. I mean, I advocated it very strongly beforehand, but it surpassed my wildest hopes when it actually was brought in.
So it had a strong sartorial benefit on the college.
Oh, much more than sartorial, yes. Benefit.
Now,
in many ways.
Looking to the future, have you any crystal ball hopes, ambitions for the college?
Well, you must be tired of hearing me standing up on the platform on St. Columba.
Frankly, no.
And that's very flattering, Morgan. But you must be really, other people must be tired of me standing up there and saying how I want to see Columbans getting dug into to Irish life, or more dug into Irish life. I think it's coming, but if I have hopes for the future for the college, they are centred really round that in making the school even more a breeding ground for young Irish men, young Irish women, who will go in and take part in Irish life more than they're doing even at the moment. I mean, the Columbans now you've seen all sorts of things in Oireachtas and in local government and in all sorts of government operations, which we didn't do many years ago. But I think we can still take a much bigger part in Irish life as a whole, and I want to see Columba's going the way that it is going at the moment. That's to say, I want to see it embracing, like Trinity, like if you like an Irish regiment in the British Army. I want to see it embrace all sides and all political backgrounds, all both religions in Ireland. I think we lack because of political events. I mean, we lack people from the north of Ireland now, which I would love to see more people from the north of Ireland. But equally with that, I'm so pleased now to see that we're also getting in Trinity a strong foreign element from Germany, but from other countries, Germany, Spain, other countries in Europe. I went through the little green book, I remember last year, and I found, I think, 14 or 15 addresses of parents of boys and girls who are in the school, and I think that's a very good thing to keep up. That we keep up our links within Ireland, but that's the most important. But that we also keep up our international, our European and our international links, which I think are terribly important. So long as we don't become an international school, I would be devastated to find St. Columba's anything other than an Irish school with an international element, but an Irish school that was going to comprehend the whole of Ireland, north and south, and as it does now, both religions.
Now, touching your last remark, I think you've partly answered it for me, because I was going to ask you, as a non-Columban yourself, you've had grandchildren here, so you've got strong Columban connections through young people. Is there anything that has percolated through to you about the ethic of the college? What makes it tick? What do you think is precious about it? What is it that makes people of varied backgrounds, David Caird, John Fannigan, just mentioned, two marvellous workers for the college, people of different religions, backgrounds. What makes them give their all for this college? Have you any comment on that? As, in effect, a part outsider, somebody who can distance himself. I'm too closely wed to the place, probably.
Well, I think it's Catholicism with a small c.
Universality, in that
Yes,
sense.
yes. And I think that it is unique in Ireland, I mean, in educational establishments. And that's the way I want to see it. I would like to see it going.
Well, John Ross, thank you very much indeed for your own contributions, not just helping us being helped by great financial institutions and benefactors. Thank you for your own many contributions over the years, and thank you for appearing today. I'm very happy to think that future generations of Columbans will be able to see you on the box at the whim of any teacher who wants to draw you out of a hat. Thank you very much for coming and visiting us.
Thank you. That's a very terrifying thought.